Agency may be expressed or implied from the acts of the principal, from his silence or lack of action, or his failure to repudiate the agency, knowing that the other is acting with authority. 1868, by the contract of agency, a person binds himself to render some service or to do something in behalf or in representation or in behalf of. That's not it. In behalf of in representation by the contract of agency, a person binds himself to render some service or to do something in representation on behalf of another with the consent or authority of the latter. Agency may be expressed or implied from the actions. Implied from the acts of the principal, from the status or lack of action as well to repudiate the agency, knowing that another person is acting with. Okay. So these are the kinds of agency. Agency may be expressed or implied from the acts of the principal, from his silence or lack of action, or his failure to repudiate the agency, knowing that another person is acting on his behalf without authority. Kinds of agency. Nature and effects. Creation, character, authority, nature, and effects. Creation, character, one where the agent has been actually authorized either orally or in writing, has been actually authorized. One which is implied version from the act of the principal, from his silence or lack of action, or his failure to repudiate the agency, knowing that another person is acting on his behalf without authority. So there are three. When it can be implied from the acts, from the acts of the principal, from his silence or his failure to repudiate the agency. Repudiate. Okay, reject. Knowing that another person is acting on his behalf without authority, or from the acts of the agent. Okay, so there arises an implied agency from the acts of the principal, from his inaction or from his silence or inaction, from his failure to repudiate the agency, knowing that another person is acting on his behalf, on or in is acting on his behalf with authority. So there is implied agency when through the acts of the principal or agent, through the silence or inaction of the principal or agent, and on the part of the principal when he fails to repudiate the agency, knowing that another person is acting on his behalf without authority. What is 1911? Okay. Okay, so there are five kinds of agency as to the consent, as to how the manner of execution. Okay, so there could be five kinds of agency as to the manner of its creation, as to the manner of its creation, as to the character, as to the extent of the power, by extent of the power, extent of business covered, um, extent of business covered, manner of creation, character, extent of business covered, authority, conferred, nature, and effects. So there are five kinds of agency as to the manner of its creation, as to the character, as to the extent of the business covered, as to the authority conferred, and as to the nature and effects. Justice creation, it can be expressed or implied express when the principal actually authorized the agent, whether orally or in writing. Implied, there arises an implied agency through the acts of the principal or agent, through the silence or inaction of the principal or agent, or on the part of the principal, he fails to repudiate the agency, knowing that another person is acting on behalf of his on his behalf without authority. And then there also, as to the creation, also there could be an agency by estoppel, agency by ratification, as well as agency by operation of law. Second, agency as to the character. So it could be gratuitous, So if there's no compensation. Second, if it's onerous, if there's compensation. Third, um, as to the extent of as to the extent of the business covered. So it could be general or specific, meaning general, all businesses of the principal agent can